This is so cool. Is this not amazing? I'm sorry, maybe it's just me. It's so cool. That is also an awful lot of my voice. I want one of these for home. We could have some fun with that, couldn't we? Thank you all for coming. We do have some important updates. I'm going to start with the biggest one. As you all know, we have a primary coming up on June 14th. So I believe you can, the Secretary of State is here. I can ask you directly. Absentee ballots are available right now. Right, you heard it from the Secretary of State. You can't get a better source than that. So you can also go to your town office and get your absentee ballot there, fill it out on the spot, turn it in, and you're done. But I actually requested mine online today. It's very simple. So highly suggest doing the absentee ballot just to get that done and out of the way. We are in the process of opening up our campaign office. We've been waiting for what has us all very excited. We're getting a break room and has a sink and a coffee maker, and so we're really excited about that. So we are moving in. We're planning to open it up with office hours on a regular basis beginning June 1st, so stay tuned for information about that. Let's see, I have one other thing. Unfortunately, Howard couldn't be with us tonight, Howard Waxman, our campaign manager, but he wanted me to share just after I believe it's June 15th through the middle of July is local organizing month. And that's an opportunity for all of our town committees to come together in ways that we weren't able to do in March, to elect officers, to see each other again, to have potlucks, whatever your heart desires. And Howard's going to be working with all of our town committees to get all of that set up. That is all I have. Does anybody have any questions?
You mentioned an office, Kelly. Where is that going to be?
Good question. The question is where the office is. We're at 3 Hall Street in Newcastle, which is off of Academy Hill, apologize. And it's, so it's just, if you go under the overpass, Route 1 overpass, it's right there on the left. Any other questions? Great, thank you all.
All right. It's now my pleasure to introduce Secretary of State Shenna Bellows to discuss legislative accomplishments that continue to make Maine a model for protecting voting rights in the country, disinformation that poses risks to our democracy and how to counter it, and concrete ways to stand up for voting rights and election integrity in 2022. Shenna has worked all the time I've known her in or leading organizations that have everything to do with advancing human rights. There's a small one complaining at the back of the room at the moment. And including while Shenna served in the Maine Senate. Now, as Maine's first woman Secretary of State, Shenna is leading important advances to ensure Maine's elections, a foundation of our democracy, stand against modern-day threats. Secretary of State, Shenna Bellows.
Thank you, Chris. And I just have to say, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for your partnership. You all have the best county chair ever. And I also want to express appreciation. We have one of the Lincoln County delegation members in the audience. If I'm missing somebody else, forgive me, with masks. But Representative Lydia Crafts, we're really grateful to have you in the legislature standing up for Holly Stover. Hey, Holly. Round of applause for Holly. So I had some difficult news, if I'm not quite myself in this talk. A dear, dear friend of mine who actually drove me to doors when I was running for state senate passed today. And I got the news. I don't check text messages while driving. I got into the parking lot and I was checking my text messages and I had the news. And it reminded me of something that I wanted to say to all of you before I start talking about democracy, which is what we're here to talk about tonight. And that is, remember March of 2020 when the pandemic hit? I thanked God that Governor Janet Mills was our governor. She and Dr. Shaw have done such a phenomenal job. But it was something like we've never experienced collectively in our lives. And what happened in that moment when the state shut down, when the country shut down, is that neighbors came together to help neighbors. And this friend of mine had worked in the Department of Labor for a long time and was expert in the unemployment system. And of course, all of you know, businesses shut down, people were losing their jobs, people who never experienced unemployment. And I would call her literally every day as a state senator and talk through some of the complicated cases that were coming our way, coming to the entire Senate caucus's way, because as chair of the Labor and Housing Committee, I was the point person for the Maine Senate for some of these. And she was there every single day, fielding those queries, helping me help people walk through their cases, walk through their claims. And I also know that every single one of you in this room came together. I know in Lincoln County, every senior citizen in this county was called by this amazing group of volunteers here in this room. That happened in my Senate district as well. We had dozens of volunteers come together and call every senior citizen in my state Senate district to say, are you okay? Do you need a mask? Do you need groceries? Do you need a garbage run? We helped one senior do her spring yard work. And that coming together, I think, was really the best of all of us. And I'm profoundly grateful to her, but profoundly grateful to each one of you, because I think we need to stay rooted in that coming together that happened in a moment of extraordinary crisis that we have not yet prevailed over. This community united. This community came together to help everyone. So please keep the family of Mary Ann Prince in your prayers today, and I'm just, the speech is for her in part. So behind me are these sunflowers, and I'm reminded immediately of Ukraine. And in Ukraine, we see people literally fighting, not just for their land, but for their democracy. Democracy is on the line in Ukraine, and earlier this week, I walked past the Blaine House in a walking meeting and saw the flag of Ukraine flying from the Blaine House, and was grateful again for Governor Janet Mills, but also grateful and remembering that there are people who are literally dying for democracy right now. And I'm grateful that President Biden has stepped up and led the Congress in supporting Ukraine, that we are united in that effort as well. But make no mistake, democracy is on the line in 2022 here in the United States, because two very dangerous things happened in 2020. Never before in American history had an American president refused to accept the peaceful transfer of power and denied the results and attempted to thwart the will of the people and our democracy. And never before January 6th had Americans stormed the United States Capitol again to try to thwart the will of the people, to overturn the election results and upend our democracy. Think about that for a minute. And so, unfortunately, the threats to our democracy did not end on January 6th or January 7th. What we have seen since then all across this country, legislature after legislature have passed bills restricting the right to vote, trying to determine who participates in our democracy, and also undermining some of the very structures of our elections themselves. It is a very serious, very dangerous moment in our country's history, where we have major candidates at every level in many states saying that they would have overturned the results of 2020, denying the presidential election of Joe Biden. So what are we doing here in Maine? How do we stand up against that? How do we plan? What do we do to protect our democracy? We can be so proud here in our state We can be so proud. Maine in 2020 ranked third in the nation in voter participation, and that is no accident. We have a series of long-standing measures that make it easy and convenient and secure for Mainers to cast their ballot. Mainers can cast their ballot up to 30 days prior to the election. That's why absentee ballots are available right now by going online to request them or by going to your town office. We have no excuse absentee voting. In Maine, anyone can vote absentee for any reason. We have same-day voter registration for your friends and neighbors who haven't participated in the past, who may wake up on election day and decide they want to participate. They can. We have all, and that is one of the big reasons, no excuse absentee voting is one of the big reasons we don't have long lines at the polls. Same-day voter registration is one of the big reasons we don't have huge numbers of Maine citizens, United States citizens, turned away and denied the right to vote. Those are some of the reasons, long-standing traditions here in our state. But we know what happens. This is an ongoing fight, right? So in 2011, I remember well, I was head of the ACLU. I think I came to the Lincoln County Democrats to speak. Governor LePage was elected. Republicans took control of the Maine House and Senate and introduced a series of bills to change our election laws. To restrict voting rights in different ways. And one of those changes was the repeal of same-day voter registration. You remember what happened. We brought a people's veto. I chaired that campaign. Many of you in this room knocked on doors, gathered signatures in 90 days in the summertime, and then we went to the ballot, and the Maine people stood up for same-day voter registration. That was because of organizing. That was because of citizen engagement. But we can't lose our watch, lose our attention. What else has happened since then? Across the country, we saw, after January 6th, we saw in Arizona, Cyber Ninja, this shadowy, partisan, Trump-affiliated organization come in. It was a grift operation. It was a fraudit. It was an alleged post-election audit, something which the Arizona Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs, had already engaged in because they had tried and true legal procedures for post-election audits. But no, the Arizona Senate decided to commission this partisan firm to come in and seize control of ballots and equipment, take equipment out of state, mark the ballots, change the ballots, deface the ballots in service of this fraudulent so-called audit that was nothing more than grift. They literally raised millions of dollars, made a final pronouncement that in fact President Joe Biden had won, as was the case, and then declared bankruptcy after having taken the money of well-meaning, disillusioned Americans. And why did Americans give Cyber Ninja money for a fake audit? Because of disinformation, malinformation, and misinformation. Now, misinformation is you get a fact wrong. You thought something happened in 1973, it happened in 1974, and you share it. It's misinformation, but it's unintentional. Disinformation is the deliberate sowing of lies. Disinformation is a deliberate attack on our fundamental democratic American values. And disinformation is often rooted in foreign attacks. Russia is a major source of disinformation in our elections, but then it goes viral through social media. And then malinformation is also incredibly dangerous. Malinformation is taking a fact and telling a lie, using that fact. So it's like what Stephen Colbert called truthiness, right? It sounds like a fact. In fact, it is a fact in a different context, in a different circumstance, but in the way that it's being portrayed, it is an outright lie. So we here in this country are experiencing an epidemic of disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation. And it, unfortunately, I hate to say it, but we are all susceptible. Why? Because we are a people of stories, right? We tell stories to establish connection. We tell stories and we remember stories more than facts and figures. And so sometimes a conspiracy or disinformation, it tells a story. It fits something perhaps that we already might have suspected or feared. It taps into deep-seated emotions. And so disinformation is something that all of us can fall victim to if we are not hugely vigilant. In fact, this morning on Facebook, I saw disinformation from someone I deeply respect, someone involved in women's rights and civil rights, put an allegation about elections in Kentucky and ES&S machines and what the machines might be doing. Well, we use ES&S machines right here in Maine. They are not connected to the internet. They are not able to be manipulated. Kentucky, just like Maine, has tried and true procedures where machines are tested at the state level and at the local level. So that was an example of disinformation coming from people so that otherwise I completely agree with. But the fear that one might have about what's happening in another state might lead you to believe disinformation. So I share this because as we evaluated, as I came into being Secretary of State, working with new partners and veteran partners in the legislature, we evaluated what are the threats to our elections here today? What are the threats to our democracy here in our state and across the nation? And how can we strengthen voting rights and strengthen our election laws? How can we stand up against these trends undermining democracy? And I am so proud to say that under the leadership of Governor Mills and our legislative delegation, we had tremendous success. So the first thing that we looked at was modernization. What can we do to make it more convenient and accessible for people to vote? So here in Maine, we codified some of the pandemic innovations, right? Online absentee ballot tracking. Not only can you request your absentee ballot online, but you can track its progress. Once you fill it in and submit it, you can check online to see if the clerk has received it and if it has been accepted. We put that into statute under the leadership of Governor Mills and this legislature. We also passed online voter registration. Now that is not happening quite yet. We're installing a new central voter registration system, but that will go into effect in 2023 and be available for the 2024 presidential election so that people can register online through their phone, their smartphone, through the internet. They can register to vote. A couple of years ago, the legislature under Governor Mills and Speaker Gideon passed automatic voter registration. We are rolling that out in June. Now you might ask, what's the difference between automatic voter registration and online voter registration? Automatic voter registration is the idea that if you go to the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, whether it's in Augusta or Rockland, when you walk in, you've changed an address, perhaps you've moved to a different town, and you're updating your license information. When you update your license information, if you are a citizen, you'll get a screen that will say you are a United States citizen, 18 years old, you are eligible to update your voter registration or register to vote. You can click no to opt out or yes to continue and be automatically registered to vote. So we are rolling that out. It's going to go into effect on June 21st and be ready for this fall. We're really excited about it. So technology modernization was one of our first initiatives. But we also looked at this issue of security, election security. How do we make sure, and I asked Secretary Hobbs in Arizona, how do we make sure that what happened in Arizona, and keep in mind, taxpayers are now on the hook for millions of dollars in replacement costs for that equipment, because once the equipment left the jurisdiction of the state, it's no longer secure, it's no longer valid, so the taxpayers are having to pay to replace that equipment in Maricopa County. And she said, I wish there had been an explicit prohibition on the transfer of ballots and equipment to third parties. And so we brought that into law. Representative Teresa Purse led a bill for chain of custody of ballots and equipment to ensure the integrity of our ballots and the integrity of our equipment. We brought another bill to protect our election workers, because what happens when people believe disinformation or malinformation, they want to blame somebody, right? They want to hold someone accountable. They want to stand up and fight. And the biggest target have been election workers, both at the local and state level. Election workers across the country have received death threats, and indeed sometimes assaults or worse. Here in Maine, we were not immune. We had 2 documented threats against election workers that led to law enforcement action here in our state following the January 6th attacks. And so we moved forward with legislation to protect our election workers, sponsored by Representative Bruce White. That just passed the legislature. It led to me getting to talk about it on NewsHour, talking about it with the whole country, sharing it with our colleagues across the country. So we are doing some incredibly important things in Augusta to secure our elections, to make elections more accessible. We codified absentee ballot drop boxes so that every municipality in Maine can have an absentee ballot drop box. A clear contrast to what they did in Texas and Georgia, where they restricted absentee ballot boxes. We are making elections more accessible, more convenient, and more secure for Maine citizens. So what can you do? What are the concrete actions that you can take? I think it is hugely important to counter disinformation when you see it, even when it's your friends. A good friend texted me this morning. I didn't see the Facebook by myself. A friend texted it to me and said, should I say something? Should I contact the person that posted? And I say, yes, this is disinformation. Yes, by the way, ESNS machines are not connected to the internet. They are tested. They are not being hacked in Kentucky. They are not being hacked in Maine. And please call your friend and tell your friend to take down that disinformation. Have that hard conversation. What else can you do? Volunteer to be a poll worker. So municipalities across the state say they're in pretty good shape for June, but they're really worried about November. We need poll workers. Under Maine law, there need to be poll workers from each major political party at the polls on election day. That is long-standing Maine law, and it's really important that people sign up for shifts. As you probably well know, you can also be an election observer. So if you have people in your networks who have questions about elections, or you just want to get more familiar, there are opportunities to observe different aspects of the election process, including absentee ballot processing. Under the law, the clerks post to the major political parties when they're going to be processing the absentee ballots. They're not counted, they're not tabulated, but they're processed. They're removed from the sealed envelopes and either placed into the tabulators or placed into the ballot collection boxes. You can watch that. You can watch the tabulation on election night. So please stand up for the truth. Have those hard conversations when you encounter them. Sometimes we think, oh, it's so outlandish. If I even answer it, it gives it credence. Maybe don't retweet it. Maybe don't amplify it in that way. But if it's somebody that you know, engage. Start telling the truth everywhere and anywhere. And check yourself. If something sounds too awful to be true, these days maybe it is true, but maybe it isn't. So check your facts. Double check that it's a trusted source, that it's an independent, that it's verified, either through a Secretary of State's office or through a trusted news source, rather than something that you've shared from somebody who's shared something from somebody. I think that's really important. So those are some of the concrete ways. And finally, ask candidates about where they stand on voting rights and protecting our elections, and work hard to ensure that we continue to elect a pro-voting legislature and that we demand that our elected officials stand up for democracy. Our nation has been a beacon of democracy for the rest of the world for a long time, even as we have had to work hard over time to improve equity, to improve inclusion, to make our democracy work better for more people. It has been a beacon of freedom and justice for the rest of the world. But we've taken some steps backward. We need to show the courage, to show the determination, to show the commitment to democracy that the people in Ukraine are showing in their fight, and that unity that every single one of you in this room showed at the beginning of the pandemic, and coming together to support one another and support this place that we all love. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Shenna. So this is an open question and answer period. If you have a question in the room, if you would make your way to the back and come across to come up to the microphone. If on Zoom you have a question, can you raise your hand and be recognized? And I see no one with raised hand at the moment on Zoom.
So in 2020, I was an attorney poll watcher for Maine, and I understood the point of that was so that we could prepare declarations and help with lawsuits if that were necessary. Do you think there's that level of scrutiny you're going to need this year, or is it more, are there other places that we could be better used in connection with election integrity than that purpose?
So one of the wonderful things about Maine is we should have huge confidence that everywhere in our state, our elections are free, fair, and secure. And having been involved in election integrity efforts when I was at the ACLU of Maine, one of the things I always found was that election day was a little bit boring, right? That there weren't a plethora of complaints or emergencies. And we're very lucky. We have an amazing Deputy Secretary of State, Julie Flynn, very experienced. We have nonpartisan election staff at the state level who work tirelessly on every detail of the elections. And we have our municipal clerks who work really hard as well to be fair and to do the best that they can to make sure that everyone accesses the ballot and has their ballot counted. So I think the purpose of poll watchers, from my perspective, the purpose of observers, is transparency is really important, right? Sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I think the infection right now is not malfeasance in our elections. I think the infection right now is disinformation that's promoting misunderstanding about how elections really work. And it's easier to explain something if you've seen it for yourself, right? It's easier to explain something if you've been there on election night and you're like, oh, there's a Republican official, there's the Democratic candidate, you know, there's the counting. It's not somebody in a back room, right? It's a collective, transparent process. You can then share that and be an ambassador for elections. So from my perspective, I think it is very laudable to sign up for election integrity efforts, whether it's with the ACLU or the League of Women Voters or other nonpartisan organizations that organize those efforts. Those are important. But I think the purpose is to better understand the process so that we can better explain it to fellow Mainers. You know, for example, I'll take a piece of disinformation that's very actively getting peddled around Maine. You know, people say, oh, actually, I got an email a couple of weeks ago, and this woman said, you know, Secretary Bellows, you have to do something about the fact that she said, and this is a lie, that, you know, more people are voting than are registered voters in the state of Maine. And that's a flat out lie. And how can you verify it? You don't need to just take my word for it. You can, go to one of the towns and watch the counting tabulations processes. But one of the things that I explained to her, or this idea that busloads of people from Massachusetts are gonna somehow, you know, come and cast their ballot in Portland or Lewiston or Damariscotta or Newcastle because they want to influence the outcome of competitive races. Like, really? But why would that not happen? Well, because we require, you know, people say you don't have a voter ID in Maine. Well, we do for purposes of voter registration. You have to demonstrate identity and residency, and you have to be a United citizen to register to vote. And then you get added to a central voter registration list. We have a centralized system. It's a list of everybody in Maine who is registered to vote or has been registered to vote and didn't tell us when they moved. That list is prepared ahead of the election. Each clerk has a voter participation list. When a ballot comes in, when a ballot's requested, they mark off the voter on the voter participation list. You know, Kelly has requested her ballot. And when the ballot is returned, they check that off as well. Kelly has returned her ballot. On election day, when you walk in, there are people there, a Republican and a Democrat, and you say, I'm Shenna Bellows, and They give me the Democratic ballot. And I walk into the election and they check me off the list. And I walk into the booth, I cast my ballot. It goes into the tabulator in Manchester because we're a machine town. That tabulator is not connected to the internet. At the end of the night, they're counting the ballots, but they also count the number of people that voted. So you can't stuff a machine because you're looking at the list of people who voted. And you can't have people from Massachusetts coming to vote because they would have to demonstrate their residency in Maine and their identity when they register. And that's getting recorded as well. After the election, and a couple of days after the election, the clerks have to immediately upload the voter participation history into the central voter registration system. So if John Q. Smith tries to vote in Damariscotta and then goes up and votes in Bangor, well, we're going to say, this person voted twice. And then we're going to call and make sure that they're not brothers or father-son or just happen to have the same name. And if you vote twice, you will be caught and you will be prosecuted. Those are the types of details that you might have just started yawning and like looking for the door when I started to go into that level of detail, right? Like that is very boring. Election administration should be boring. But if you've seen it for yourself, then when people say, oh, you know, I know, maybe not here, but probably in Waterville, they let all those people from Massachusetts vote. No, it couldn't have happened because I watched, like there are Republicans and Democrats there checking people in, asking for ID, asking for residency if they're not registered. Like, if you're not registered, you have to register. If you register, you have to have an ID and proof of residency. It's that simple. So, there are a lot more questions. I'm sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
Yes. There are several more. One online, so I'll read it. Can you do a nonpartisan explanation of the recent innovations in voter registration as a press release to local weekly newspapers? It might be information for folks who are hearing more of the diss about our process, particularly about how ranked choice voting works.
That's a great idea. We'll make that happen. I know we send out press releases on our innovations, but I don't know if some of the local press gets those innovations. I just signed up with Larry to talk on Lincoln County Television because, you know, public access television is the farmer's market of television and we need to go local, right? Yes, that's a great idea. We'll make sure that the local outlets are on our press list as well.
Could you briefly describe the chain of custody of a ballot when I drop it or slide it into the machine in South Bristol? Where does it go? What happens to it? And then how does it find its way, my vote find its way to Augusta and it gets counted?
So it's actually getting counted locally in South Bristol, right? So you put it into the tabulator in South Bristol, if South Bristol is a tabulating town. Then at the end of the night, so I'm going to get really geeky for a minute, hopefully not lose everybody. So there's software in the machine that is programmed to read the ballot. And it is not in the machine itself. It's like a USB device, but it's specialized. Not anybody can replicate it. You can't create a USB device for the ES&S machine. It is programmed by nonpartisan election officials at the state level. It is tested by a different group of nonpartisan election officials at the state level. There's a group of nonpartisan election officials at the state level who are literally create a sample ballot for each race all across the state, and then take the programmed device for a particular town, South Bristol, say, and so they've created sample ballots for South Bristol, where one's where the Republicans win, one's where the Democrats win. They use the tabulating machine at the state office with this programmed device, and they test it. Does it work? And it's a different group of people testing it than the people programming it. Then that gets securely transported through the U.S. Postal Service to South Bristol. In South Bristol, the clerk, in the presence of someone else, is required to test the device, test that the tabulator, it's called a memory device, ballot tabulator memory device, functions. They need to certify that to us. They need to submit documentation that the device, that they tested it, and then it functioned. Then the device is placed into the machine, and the machine is active for Election Day. So on Election Day, if you're there after 8 o'clock, you would see them run the tape on the machine. You would see them run the results on the machine. And it would say, Representative Stover, is that your district? 100% for Representative Stover. Just kidding. That would be disinformation. That's a joke. And that then gets reported to the state elections office. Now, let's say it's a three-way primary for Representative Stover, which obviously did not happen. But let's say it did. Let's say it's a ranked choice primary, and it's too close to call, and Representative Stover says, I want to recount. Those memory devices would get transported by state police to the Secretary of State's office, where we would use those memory devices in different tabulators, and we would do that in front of Republican Party and Democratic Party representatives, and we would run those tallies again. The ballots themselves get securely stored after an election in a locked container. They can only be opened with authority from the Secretary of State's office. So if there is a hand recount in a late race that is not ranked choice voting, that would happen at the local level with observers from both parties under the explicit authorization of the Secretary of State. Does that answer your question? Okay. And please, if anybody needs coffee.
Thank you for being here, Secretary of State Bellows. I have a question, but you have clarified disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation to me. This doesn't just happen in voting. It happens a lot in education. Educators have been accused of teaching critical race theory, which is history. So how do we do this? Especially for immigrants like myself, sometimes it's confusing.
Yeah. So, two things. With disinformation, malinformation, and misinformation, sometimes a point-by-point rebuttal is not as useful as reminding people of common sense. So what do I mean by that? There was a missive last winter that went to the entire legislature. And it was full of what President Biden would call malarkey. It was just garbage. All of it was garbage. There were numbers that made no sense, that were not grounded in reality. We decided at the Secretary of State's office, rather than say, this number is not true because of this, and this number is not true because of that, and this number is not true because of that, we did a webinar for any legislator that wanted to participate, and we went through disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation. We talked about the documented attacks, the deliberate efforts by Russia, by Iran, by China, who are the three that have been documented by the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency as having done some deliberate disinformation online to create distrust in American elections. So we walked legislators through what that looks like, and then how it gets amplified by people who are perfectly well-meaning. So instead of going point by point, we went through the larger issues, right? Why is this happening? Why is this being spread? What's the purpose behind it? Why did you get this message? And that was an effective way to nip it in the bud, right? To be like, instead of going point by point, just being like, this is garbage. But I am deeply sorry, because you're right. Immigrants are frequently attacked by disinformation and racism. There's a tremendous amount of disinformation and malinformation that's rooted in racism in our country. So, thank you. I've probably gone way over time, Chris. I apologize. How are we doing?
We're fine, and I have asked Those on Zoom, I haven't received any further questions.
Okay,
So unless there's someone else, I don't see anyone in line here.
great.
I think we're ready to let you go, get ready
All
for
right.
your escape to a little vacation time.
Yes, I'm headed to Monhegan, so yay, for bird watching. Thank you, every one of you who cares about our democracy, who stands up, whether it's for freedom of information in the press or whether it's for civic engagement, taking care of neighbors. Democracy depends on trust, it depends on engagement, it depends on the people standing up, we the people. Thank you.